Hello again, fellow YouTubers. Solomon Pleasant from Team O.M.G. Vanguard, back with another Cardfight Vanguard clan review analysis thing. And today we have Murakumo, one of the saddest clans in the game. Why? I will explain. So, Murakumo actually started off as Nubatama support. Yeah, this is going great. This is already a great start to it. And it just kind of... I think the original idea was it was going to be Nubatama support, but then Bushiroad's like, whoa, Nubatama has really good support right now. We don't need to give it more support. Even though it only had, 4 cards and wasn't a deck. So they're just like, alright, we already announced these cards, what do? Make them into a new clan, we're calling them Murakumo. So that's what they became. And Murakumo's been dead on arrival, I'm gonna be honest. Like, there have been people who try to make good Murakumo decks, and they can make good Murakumo decks, but the problem is, Murakumo's been just dead on arrival because of the sheer fact that they've never really had a concept. I'm just going to explain based on how the decks have kind of evolved. Starting off Season 1 Murakumo, yes, it was in Season 1. Again, there's just a lot of... It's really gone through a lot. Like, Murakumo clearly was not supposed to be its own clan. It was supposed to be Nubatama support. And I'm not saying this because I like Nubatama, because seeing the support here, it looks like just Nubatama wasn't even going to deal with binding. It was just going to have a bunch of, have a rush mechanic to it, but in here, I'm just going to explain. Season 1, we had Mandala Lord as pretty much the only deck there. What Mandala Lord does was say, hey, Counterblast 1, discard a copy of me, and I reduce your opponent's attack by 10,000, which is not bad. And then Season 2, we got cards like Shiryuki, which is Mandala Lord, but better. And then Season 3, we got the Break Ride, and we got Hyaki Vogue, and we also got the other one, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then Season 4, they're still just kind of in limbo after having a really good Hyaki Vogue deck. And I've talked about Hyaki Vogue a lot, but I'm going to talk about him here because there's not much else to talk about. The big thing with Murakumo seems to be obtaining copies of themselves, much like real ninjas, and then either calling those copies to the field via superior call, or having those copies in your hand to do shenanigans with. This sounds like a good idea, and Neo Nectar kind of does this too, and I'll get to Neo Nectar another day, but it sounds like a good idea, but it doesn't do it well enough in my opinion. And I'm just gonna get to the grade 3s real quick. One, there aren't really any worthy grade 0s talking about. There is, however, one grade 1 that I do want to mention before we really get into the whole grade 3s, because Murakumo just works really weird from the rest of the game. Stealth Fiend or Borokart is a good unit to pretty much have in any deck, because he basically calls out copies of himself. He says, hey, Counterblast 1 when he's placed on Vanguard or Rearguard. If you have a Murakumo Vanguard, you may pay the cost. If you do, choose another Murakumo unit and get a copy of it out. It has to be something not named Ouroborocart, which makes sense. Try that again. So what Ouroborocart does is Counterblast 1, and when it's placed on Vanguard or Rearguard, I can choose another Murakumo, get a copy of it from the deck, and shuffle my deck, and at the end of the turn, put it back. So that is one of the best units in Murakumo, and that's where the problem comes up. They really do a lot of hit and run tactics, but in Cardfight that doesn't necessarily, well, it works, but it has to be done right. It's clear that it wants to go for a rush mechanic, focusing more on Counterblast than it does. I'll just wait for that. Okay, yep, it's not going to load. There we go. It seems to want to focus on a rush mechanic that involves Counterblast as opposed to Spike Brothers' big Soul Blast heavy rush, but the problem comes up that they don't get any power from doing this. Most of their best units just say, call out a copy. Okay, since it's going back at the end of the turn, wouldn't you want to have power enough so that it can actually do some damage, as opposed to just running back and hiding after they've attempted to maybe hit you? That's where one of the problems shows up for this clan. So, again, we talked about Mandala Lord. Storm was kind of the ride chain version of it, which pretty much did the same thing. So, before that, Zenbaku. was another deck that showed up around this time, and this is when Comic Style was coming out, when Murakumo was first really introduced per se. And Zanbaku is actually an interesting-esque card, and it seems to be something, because this really shows that Murakumo originally was trying to focus on being troll-like, a lot like how ninjas could be and how Nugatomo likes to do it. Because this card says, at the beginning of your opponent's ride phase, if your opponent has a grade 3 or greater Vanguard, he may discard a card, he may choose a card and discard it. If he does not, he cannot normal ride. Now, originally this was supposed to just... Now, in the manga, this was supposed to be, hey, if I'm on the field, if you don't discard something, you can't ride, keeping you locked down. But this is still a valid unit for break rides, because it prevents you from pretty much break riding, which is a very interesting idea. And this seemed like, but since break rides are dead now, this thing's pretty much absolutely useless. But at the time, it was very interesting, and it's a real shame nobody really utilized this unit. Now, going back to the other grade 3s as mentioned earlier, after Shiryuki came out, we got 2 more decks per se. There's the Break Ride, which is pretty much the universal grade 3 in all Murakumo decks. What the Break Ride does is it gets out 2 more copies of a grade 3 that you Break Ride it with, which is good for things like Shiryuki, Mandala, Hyaki Vogue, or Consumi Rogue, which we'll get to in a second. But I know I talked a lot about Hyaki Vogue, but considering he is probably one of the best cards in the clan, it's good talking about him again. This is kind of where Murakumo should go. This is what Murakumo should be about. Giving power to your copies. Because considering those copies are since you most likely broke road with Hyaki, and considering those copies are going to go to your hand, you might as well give them power so that they can actually do something while they're there, because they're going to be gone next turn, next turn. And this is something that I think Murakumo should really do, because this is one of the best Murakumo decks, still, because the Legion is not that good. But this is still one of the better decks, because it pretty much says, hey, I have a front row of 21. You are guarding with something. The fact that no other real Murakumo deck focuses on that is just why Murakumo can't get itself together and become a good clan, because there aren't other units that do the same thing. Imagine if a Oboro card said, call out a copy and give it +5. That would be good, because when it goes back, at least you gave it something before it went back. That's how a lot of the rush decks work. Like with Aquaforce and their multiple stands, or Novas with their multiple stands. Hey, we get power from more attacks. Or Spike Brothers. If you you can't just be like, Soul Blast, I call something out, and that's it. It's usually, Soul Blast, I get +5, and then I leave. That's my thing. And a lot of Murakumo decks are actually very defensive, surprisingly, as opposed to Hyaki being very offensive. And Kasumi Rogue is a good example of that, as well as Shiryuki. Because Murakumo seems to have this mindset of, I have multiple copies of cards. I'm going to use that for defense. When most of the cards in my deck get out cards and then send them back, which would indicate I would be a rush deck, but I'm going to use most of it for defense. This one specifically says, hey, Counterblast 1, when you're being attacked, you can call something to the guard circle, Counterblast 1, and if you do, get up to choose one card with the same name as that unit from... Okay, what this says is Counterblast 1, when your unit is placed on G from your cancel. When this unit is placed on the guard zone from your hand, you may pay the cost. If you do, search your deck for up to one card with the same name of it and call it to the guard zone as well. Which sounds like a good idea, but if you're guarding with a trigger, why would you call out another trigger and waste that trigger for a counterblast? Sure to get up defense, but why would you do that? When you could just, spam guard for the same amount. And you can also have the Act Vanguard skill, Counterblast 1. You may choose a grade 2 or greater rear guard, search your deck for another one, call it, and until the end of the turn, the unit called by the... And at the end of the turn, bounce it back to the bottom. See, there's the problem there. Call it out, and then bounce it back. Where is the anything in that? Because one, most grade 3s don't work. Most grade 3 Murakumos don't have any effect on rearguard, so it's no benefit to call out an 11k. And most of your grade 2s aren't strong enough to hit 11k Vanguards. So where is the purpose in using up that counterblast when you can just use something for your hand? And most people be like, well, Murakumo's idea is to focus on conserving your hand. Yeah, but you're going to need to have... But why would you call a bunch of units in a rush formation and then not utilize or get more effects off trying to rush? Murakumo really does not seem to have any distinctive idea of whether it wants to rush or not. And it's not sure if it wants to be a defensive clan or an offensive clan. And because of that, it leads to confusion, which is why almost nobody plays Murakumo, and with the people that do, they pretty much use Hyaki because Hyaki is the only one that has it down. Hey, I counterblasted, I got a copy of myself out, I locked a unit, guess what? We all get plus 10. That's our rush mechanic. We get power from actually we get a benefit from having copies. Because Murakumo's big staple is calling out specific copies. And you have a 10k. You have the Stealth Hair Fiend, which says counterblast 1, and if I hit, I can call out another copy of myself. Okay. And there's even a stride unit that says the back row may attack, which, copying Geronimo, but even then, it's still like, okay, so that's... Yeah, I probably should actually talk about the actual 4 that actually is good, because Shiryuki's grade 4 is decent, but just kind of there. This is another one that actually kind of has something down, but it's only there as a setup. This unit right here, Ambush, and this is, I think, our first grade 4 we're really talking about besides Nobel. Ambush Demonic / Rogue Kagagmajin. He seems to have this good setup idea, which is when your unit is placed on rearguard, if the number of units you have with the same name as that unit is 2 or more, until the end of the turn, that unit gets plus 200. So, when you call out a unit, if you have 2 more of that unit already on the field, you get plus 2. Okay, that's relatively decent. And the thing of this may attack from the back row. Okay, so pretty much the idea is call out 2 more copies of something that you already have on the field, and then just have all 4 of those rush. Which, yeah, this sounds very Rush-esque, but Murakumo seems to have the idea of, I want to conserve my hand. So, again, Murakumo really has a hard time deciding whether they want to rush and gain power from rushing, or if they want to be defensive and reduce their opponent's attack, and therefore be defensive in that esque. Either way, neither one of them can really come to a consensus and take over the other side, and because of that, Murakumo's just left in this area where they can't do much and can't win against most clans because they don't have enough power to really beat other clans. So, something else I probably do want to mention is, if there's something that most people watching this should notice, is that I mostly talk about the grade 3s in Murakumo because all Murakumo decks really bank on what size 3 you have. Which is not a way to go in Vanguard. A lot of Vanguard decks focus on the archetype in general, or the clan in general. Like Grand Blue focuses on their whole concept of resurrecting from the drop zone. They don't just focus on Cocytus. They don't just focus on Cocytus' skills. No, they focus on a concept altogether. And stuff like Kagro. Field control. Control the field. So, all the units are going to do stuff that helps in that situation. Or, what's another one? Spike Brothers. They don't just focus on Dudley Emperor. Or Dudley Lucifer. Or some grade 3, insert grade 3 here. They don't just focus on his skills and what he does and then build a deck around that. They focus altogether on their unique skills and then play off each other's skills. Most clans and most archetypes will do that. Like, imagine if Ancient Dragons just focused on Tyranno Legend. Imagine that. It wouldn't be that good of a deck because the other Ancient Dragons would just be like, oh, we just kind of do things. And then Tyranno Legend just benefits off most of that stuff. The big problems with Murakumo are, one, they cannot, again, I've stressed this enough, they cannot decide between aggro or defensive. They need to pick a side, because if they stay on both sides, they cannot play both sides. If you're playing both sides, you have to be a very rounded, balanced clan, and Murakumo just isn't that. It's not going to be one of those clans, guys. It's not going to get a ton of support, so it's not going to be very rounded and balanced. So they have to pick either really heavy tanky defensive, like Oracle Genesis or insert clan Oracle Genesis, maybe Neo Nectar, or, you know, something of that nature. Or it has to be really aggro. Spike Brothers. Spike Brothers is always the first that comes to mind. Spikes. Dark Irregulars is another good aggro concept. Tachis. Aggro. It can't be both. Like, it has to pick a side. The problem is it doesn't. Second, their decks really base off what grade 3 you use. And, again, that isn't a good way to play it. You really should play it based off of what your deck can do when it works together. Like, if you run like, all Murakumo decks have Ouroboros card in their decks. And you get out copies of monsters. That's good, but what happens after that? Like, it may sound kind of demanding as this player who does not use Murakumo and uses a lot of aggro decks and usually is, like, very accustomed to getting power when doing superior calls, but that's pretty much what every clan that superior calls does. Either that, or the Vanguard gets some effect off of superior calling. As much as I hate Golds, at least they're doing it right. At least Golds and Neos are doing it right of when they superior call, they get some benefit from that. Murakumo really doesn't get a benefit from superior calling copies of themselves. Like, at least if they superior called whatever they wanted, that would at least be somewhat beneficial, because then you can just do whatever you want. But you have to superior call a copy. It's like, well, these copies better do something when they're together. Oh, they don't? Oh, well, that sucks. Like, if Murakumo had a card that said, if you have a copy of this unit on the field, this unit gets... If you have a unit on the field with this unit's name, this unit gets +5. And then since both of those units have the same name and both have the same effect, they would both get +5. To a 9K or 10K, that would be really amazing, but Murakumo has nothing like that. And even Bermuda can do a lot better than Murakumo, because at least when Bermuda calls out copies of themselves, they at least get power off it. Murakumo gets really no benefits off of calling copies. You really could just run a bunch of vanillas and then just run your grade 3 lineup of a break ride and insert grade 3 here, and you pretty much do the same thing. And that's why Murakumo is a low tier deck. It is low tier. And it's one of the few clans where I'm just like, yeah, this is a bad clan. It has an idea. It has a concept there. But it just can't execute it right. It really does not execute it right. And some of my friends who like to argue with me and like to say I'm wrong about everything because I don't know, are like, no, Murakumo has the concept of, you know, obtaining hand advantage. Yeah, they don't really obtain hand advantage because most of their cards are weak and therefore they cannot really do anything to damage the opponent's hand, and therefore their opponent has the same amount of hand as you. Hand advantage implies you have either more or less, in the case of Nubatama, than your opponent. That's what hand advantage is. Murakumo really does not obtain hand advantage. It doesn't. It can't be defensive and aggro at the same time. When it tries to be defensive, only like 1 or 2 cards do it. When it tries to be aggro, only 1 or 2 cards can pull it off. So, that's the problem. So, overall, because I know Murakumo's getting support in the Vanguard G Set 3, so I really hope Bushiroad takes into consideration what they've been doing with Murakumo and actually, you know, get units that can work. I just really hope. And this kind of dates this video because they're probably just going to release support that's crap, because they usually do, and then they give like 1 or 2 good cards, which they do for most clans, but anyway, I digress. This has been Solomon Pleasant. This has been a clan review of Murakumo, and this is Solomon Pleasant signing off.